Good morning, good afternoon. Please allow me to say a few words in French about the interpretation so that French-speaking people can follow us. Bonjour. Pour ceux qui parlent français, j'aimerais dire qu'il y a interprétation. Vous appuyez sur le bouton interprétation en bas à gauche et vous choisissez français ou French. I am Dawit Bakkala, Regional Vice President for Africa for Internet Society. I am honored to moderate from Addis Ababa this fourth webinar of the African Internet Resilience webinar series. I welcome you all, the presenters in particular, and the participants as well. And I would like to thank you all for choosing to spend the next 90 minutes with us. This meeting is on Zoom, but you can follow it on live streaming, Facebook, and Twitter. This fourth webinar of the African Internet Resilience series focuses on measuring Africa's internet resilience. The series of webinars are organized by the African Union Commission, Internet Society, African Telecommunications Union, Association for Progressive Communication, Mozilla, and NetHope. We started with the first webinar that focused on the impact of COVID-19 on Africa's internet on June 1. Then we organized successive webinars on shared spectrum strategies to increase affordable access in rural areas, and then cybersecurity during COVID-19. In the last 2 decades, internet penetration in Africa increased from 0.5% in 2000 to almost 40% today. Similarly, internet bandwidth increased exponentially. Even the cost of internet has decreased considerably. We should all be proud of these major achievements. However, there is a major problem that we have not resolved. That is reliability. I don't think that we can proudly say that we have a reliable connectivity in Africa. Of course, the problem is not equally severe everywhere, but in many countries, you cannot be certain that your connection will stay active for this whole webinar session. Therefore, I believe that making internet reliable is the next frontier for internet in Africa. But you cannot improve something that we don't measure. And currently, we don't have a lot of data on the reliability of internet in Africa. I cannot tell you what is the uptime of internet in Ethiopia, where I am, for example. All I know is that there is a high chance that my connection won't stay up for the whole hour or hour and a half, which is why I have a backup person for my role in this webinar. To improve reliability, we should therefore start to measure the extent of the problem. Only then we can develop a strategy to improve it. We can also learn from each other, since the countries or the operators with low reliability can learn from those with high reliability. This is why ISOC and AFRINIC agreed to work on a project to measure Africa's internet. And I'm happy that our partners of this webinar agreed that it focuses on this important issue. This webinar is organized as follows. After the opening speech by Mr. Mokhtar Yedali from the African Union Commission, Amreesh Phokeer from AFRINIC, Emil Aben from MLab will present their experiences on measuring the internet. Following that, Kevin Chege from Internet Society will talk about measuring internet resilience in Africa project before the Q&A. Before inviting Mokhtar for the opening session, I would like to give you some rules of engagement. Participants are encouraged to ask questions in the Q&A and on Zoom. We are also going to give you some more instructions on Q&A on the chat room. You can also ask questions on the other channels like Facebook and Twitter. We have some time. If we have some time, we might allow a few people to ask questions on Zoom verbally. I said before, to and from French to English. For the interpretation, you need to click on the interpretation button at the right corner. When you click on it, you will see that there will be off English and French. You choose whichever language you would like to hear. And then if you don't want to have the other language in the background, you have to mute original audio. Otherwise, you'll hear it at the back. The meeting is recorded, and so that we can share it with other people after this meeting. For Twitter users, please use the hashtag #Africa Internet Resilience. Without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Mokhtar Yedali for the opening speech. Mokhtar is head of Information Society Division of the African Union Commission, where he has been working since 2008. He is a telecom and satellite and computer engineer with an MBA in international business. He has more than 20 years of international experience in the field of communication and networks management, resource evaluation, and policy preparation. Mokhtar is a former staff member of Intelsat in the USA and RASCOM in Cote d'Ivoire. Welcome, Mokhtar. You have 5 minutes for your opening speech.
Thank you very much, David. First of all, I thought you were speaking about somebody else, not me. But then, I finally discovered when you mentioned RASCOM that I was there. So indeed, it is really very hard to follow you when you had made all these nice speeches and introduction to the webinar. I just wanted to join my voice to you and to really congratulate you and to all our partners that are really co-organizing with us this series of webinar. This is the number 4, as you mentioned. I will not mention their name. You have mentioned their name, all of them, for the sake of time. But I wanted to really thank you and thank them for all their contribution on making this happen, and specifically also our supporting technical staff from each and every parties. This area is actually very difficult for us, specifically for you and I, based now here in Ethiopia, where we don't have internet connection and we have to struggle to really find the connectivity somewhere else, with all the risks that we do have in being not following the rules of confinement that has been both set by the African Union and by the Ethiopian government. Nevertheless, we couldn't miss this opportunity really to exchange with our colleagues and friends all over the world to discuss the important matters related to the evolution of internet. We started at the beginning with the resilience overall. We have the regulators and the operators contributing. Then we went down to the access with regard to the spectrum. And then we went to the cybersecurity matters. And today we are talking about measurements. Measurements, we are not measuring, as you said, just for the sake of measuring. We wanted to see exactly what's going to happen and how our internet in Africa is actually meeting the current requirements of internet being discovered by most of our Africans for their daily lives in terms of conducting their business, education, health, and specifically stay connected with people around them, specifically on this difficult time. With that, we will have certainly contribution from our different stakeholders and contributors, such as AFRINIC, REP, MLabs, and so on, and from our ISOC also colleagues. And in the same time, we would love to come up with really some specific recommendation that would be the blueprint for what we plan to do to take the appropriate measure from the African Union point of view, from all operators' point of view, and from the African stakeholder point of view, to come up with some recommendation that we can do right away, and to see how we can not only address the current situation of COVID, but also future crisis we do have, and also to make sure that the internet is really suitable for the conduct of Africa business and development. With that, I really would like to wish you a fruitful discussion, and I'm handing it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mokhtar, and thank you as well for all your support. We couldn't have this series of webinar without you and the African Union. Now I would like to invite Amreesh Phokeer to talk about AFRINIC's experience on measuring the internet. Amreesh is currently Research and Innovation Manager at AFRINIC, and he's leading data analytics and research projects at AFRINIC. His focus areas are interdomain routing, network security, internet measurements, content delivery, and quality and QoE, with a particular emphasis on African networks. Prior to working at AFRINIC, Amreesh was a guest researcher at NIST or NIST. Amreesh, you have 15 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay, so hello everyone. So today I'm going to talk about some internet measurement works that we have been doing at AFRINIC. So how this actually tie into the whole internet measurement, internet resilience measurement work that we want to do together with the Internet Society. Next slide, please. So why do we want to measure? Of course, you must have heard about this very popular saying, so if you can't measure it, you can't improve it, by Lord Kelvin. So internet is the same. You want to measure different aspects of the internet, whether it is a reachability or latency to some servers. You want to have good quality of service to different services that you are paying for, or even free services. So there are different aspects of the internet, some technical and some less technical. Even things such as affordability or accessibility can eventually also be measured on the internet. So it really depends where you are on the value chain of the internet. Whether you are a network operator, then you would be mostly interested into the technical aspect of the internet. But on the other side, if you are an end user or an activist fighting for internet rights, you would be mostly interested, for example, in measuring whether a country or not is performing internet shutdowns. Next slide, please. So at AFRINIC, of course, we provide measurements and statistics for our own members. Our own members being network operators, be it internet service providers, universities, so forth and so on. So we give them registration statistics, information about whether or not their prefixes are appearing on the routing table, and the overall health of their resources. But of course, other stakeholders within the AFRINIC community, such as regulators, are also interested to know, so what's happening in my country, in my internet network? Are the ISPs actually providing the services they are asking their subscribers to pay for? Is there an adequate level of peering, for example? And of course, the larger community, as I mentioned, would like to understand the overall state of the internet, whether there have been any impact because of outages or shutdowns, as I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So at AFRINIC, we run two main programs related to research and internet measurement. So the first one is the Africa Internet Measurement Program, AIM, in which we bundle everything we do internet measurement related. So for example, we are a RIPE Atlas ambassador. RIPE Atlas, so my friend Emil will talk about it a little bit more. So it's a measurement platform for which we try to look for hosts for them to host the system so that it allows us to increase the measurement footprint in Africa, therefore allowing us to measure from more varied places on the continent. We provide, as I said, we provide statistics. We have 2 portals right now, one called AIRS, the Africa Internet Routing and Registration Statistics, and AFRINIC Stats, which basically bundle everything that we do at AFRINIC. We also have a measurement working group in which we organize workshops at the African Internet Summit or other meetings. We organize hackathons, and also we do webinars on research topics where we invite, for example, an expert to talk about a specific research paper. Of course, we do run our own measurements. In the past, we have done some latency measurements. We try to find where local content in Africa are hosted. And of course, as we maintain systems such as RPKI and DNS, we try also to measure the efficiency of those systems. And of course, in terms of dissemination, we run scientific publication, but this year we're also organizing a conference called AFRICOM, which is going, unfortunately, to happen online, but still happening in December, where basically we try to get students to submit papers on the research work they have done with regards to internet research. Next slide, please. The other program that we run is called ARC, AFRINIC Research Collaboration, where we partner with the other institutions. For example, Research ICT Africa, which is a policy think tank in South Africa. They mostly work on policy-related research projects. We have, for example, worked with them on one called Internet Usage and Content Hosting, which eventually became a policy brief that we use now to approach, for example, regulators or other decision makers in countries. So we partner with our sister organizations, RIPE NCC and AFRINIC, on different aspects of measurements. ISOC now with the Internet Resilience Measurement Project. And of course, we have a few academic partners. We are looking for more eventually, where we work on projects related to internet measurements. Next slide, please. So I will talk about some past studies that happen in the African context. Next slide, please. So there have been a few I would say a few research done, mostly by academics in Africa. Research that has been looking into, for example, internet connectivity from a specific country to other countries. Some researchers have been looking at the phenomenon of tromboning, where actually networks within the same country would actually use external connectivity to reach networks within the same country. This has been researched a few times actually by a few researchers, and actually using a measurement platform such as RIPE Atlas. Some other people looked into mostly quality of experience, so measuring, for example, web page loading time in specific countries in Africa. And others looked into mobile performance measurement, but not so much actually. So I think I really believe there are still room for more mobile performance measurement in Africa actually. Next slide, please. At AFRINIC itself, we have been looking into regional connectivity, and also we have published 2 papers with regards to country-level latency and inter-country level latency, where we have actually identified that we could basically cluster Africa into a few groups of countries, and you could actually find some particularities. For example, Madagascar, which is found in the Indian Ocean, is actually closer to the northern African countries, which doesn't really make sense because they are geographically closer to, for example, Southern Africa. So this actually revealed that there are still a lot of, I would say, traffic engineering, more peering to do at the regional level. And this type of information actually can actually tell us about the resilience of the networks in the country. And on the other hand, CDN or when they want to decide to come and put their nodes in Africa, such information would be quite important for them as well. Next slide, please. We have also run a study about content hosting. So where we had a look at the news websites that are used in Africa, in different African countries. So we wanted to have a look at local content. So we took news websites because news are supposed to be local, and without much surprise, unfortunately, a lot of the news websites are actually hosted outside of Africa. And this, of course, have a big impact in terms of quality of experience for the end users, especially for countries, less provisioned countries such as DRC and other countries in Central Africa, which are not well connected to even the outside the outside world. Next slide, please. This is also a study that we have done on content delivery, where basically we were looking at the Google caches in Africa and what is the latency basically from African countries to Google caches. Not all countries have a Google cache, so not obviously not everyone would benefit from new technologies, for example, that Google is rolling out. So basically, what we were saying here, that there is a mismatch between countries. Some countries are better provisioned, some are less provisioned, and even if CDNs would want to come to Africa, there are big issues. For example, bandwidth is still quite on the high side in terms of price. So cache filling is still a problem, and sometimes you have the problem of power, that is an unstable infrastructure, which actually hinder more CDNs to come and put their nodes in Africa. Next slide, please. So recently, we have also surveyed some network operators, around 100 of them from 34 different countries. So we basically wanted here to know what is the level of awareness in terms of internet measurements? Is it something that they do on a daily basis, for example, to measure the network performance of the network? And for example, if they're providing services, are the end users also benefiting from a good quality of service? So we found out that not really. There seems to be a lack of interest and knowledge in terms of measurement platforms. Only a few, less than, I would say 10% of the operators are actually running measurements. And this actually tells us that we have to do more awareness efforts, more education, and so on. Next slide, please. In terms of current project, next slide. We are right now working on what we call a country dashboard. So data that we will be collecting from the Internet Resilience Project, we will be feeding that into a dashboard. So basically, what we want to do here is to create some sort of country reports. We would give, let's say, regulator what's the state of their national or regional or even international connectivity, and also try to identify the bottlenecks in terms of whether there is, we call it a choke point potential. For example, if there is only one ISP in a country, I would take the example of Ethiopia, where there is a choke point potential there, and we could actually advise governments or the organizations that, okay, for them to have a better and more resilient internet, it's good to actually have more internet service providers and so on. Next slide, please. We have also a few projects related to DNS. In this particular one, we are looking into compliance to DNS best practices, where basically at the end of the day, we will check whether those operating a name server are actually abiding by a few best practices. And one of them is eDNS compliance, which the DNS Flag Day has taken on board. And at the end of the day, the idea is actually to inform AFRINIC members or CCTLD operators that perhaps they should change one or two things on their network to make it more resilient. Next slide, please. To conclude, we do have a few challenges, but also a few opportunities. As I said, infrastructure-wise, in terms of measurement, internet measurement, we still have poor coverage. Right now, Africa is also mostly mobile. So I would say most of our measurement platforms that are currently existing now are mostly located in core networks. So the mobile aspect of things are not measured at all. And of course, power issues can still be a problem in our region. Funding also. So how would you actually run measurement in a sustained way, also at wide scale, as the RIPE Atlas people and the RIPE NCC are doing? We would need funding internally and externally, of course. And now we still, unfortunately, in our region have a few issues with interference, shutdown, and censorship is quite common. David can talk about it maybe later on. And as I said, lack of interest, but this can be fixed, I suppose, by more education and more advocacy. Opportunities, of course. We have more and more people interested in internet measurements, whether it is international organizations such as the ITU. The regulators actually are quite interested. They have approached AFRINIC a few times. They really want us to help them run campaigns, and I really think and really believe that such a project such as the Internet Resilience Project would actually be very beneficial to them. And what's next? So in the future, as I said, Africa has some big particularities that are very different from other places in the world. So, for example, we have a big focus on mobile measurements. So, how can we perhaps come up with some sort of our own measurement platform? Of course, leveraging on existing ones such as RIPE Atlas and MLab to measure our own particularities, as I say. I think that's my last slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Amreesh, for this excellent presentation. I think we are really lucky to have you and your team in AFRINIC doing this kind of work, since there are not many who do research in this area in Africa. So thank you. Now I would like to call upon Emil Abben to talk about RIPE's experience on measuring the internet. Emil is a senior research engineer for the Research and Development Department at the RIPE NCC, which is the equivalent of AFRINIC in Europe and Middle East. He is interested in internet measurement and technology changes like the transition to IPv6. He frequently posts on RIPE Labs. Emil had an MSc degree in chemistry from the University of Nijmegen, Netherlands. I'm sorry, Emil, if I'm not pronouncing the names correctly.
No worries, David. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, so I would like to speak for a little bit about the perspective we gained from running large measurement infrastructures, two in particular, RIPE Atlas and RIPE RIS. So we are, can I have the next slide, please? We are a sister organization of AFRINIC, one of the 5 regional internet registries. And as Amreesh already pointed out, we are quite collaborative between all the RIRs. Of course, we have a core role, which is being a database of internet resources. But apart from that, we also connect people, communities, stakeholders, and we are a neutral source of data. And as part of being that neutral source of data, at the RIPE NCC, we run these two large measurement infrastructures. And on the next slide, yes, thank you. this is basically a one-slide summary of one of them that Amreesh already touched upon. It's called RIPE Atlas. It's on the right, you see a little device. Amreesh had two other devices on his in his presentation, and we have over 10,000 of these devices spread worldwide, doing internet measurements. And specifically, what's interesting in the context of resilience is latency measurements. So we send packets to an endpoint on the internet, and we measure how fast that is. And we have trace routes, which is measuring the path going from that vantage point towards an arbitrary point on the internet. And so this is all community-based. It is for the internet community by the internet community. And as Amreesh also pointed out, you want to measure to actually know if something is good or bad. And I'd like to point out this measures the data plane of the internet. So this is the actual packets. This is what your packets actually do on the real internet. And Lai is gonna, what we don't do is speed measurements, speed tests, bandwidth, and Lai is gonna touch upon that later. So this purely focuses on measuring is something up or not, and what latencies do we have. On my next slide, there's the other measurement infrastructure that we run, which is called RIPE-RIS. And there's a URL there, ris.ripe.net, if you want to know more. And for Atlas, there's also atlas.ripe.net, that was on the previous slide. This also is a community-based internet measurement. So, and in this case, we measure the internet control plane. There's a protocol called the Border Gateway Protocol that actually captures how packets are to be routed. So all the ISPs on the internet, they exchange the information via this protocol, and we listen in on that. So all the reachability information on the control plane, we capture that from hundreds of points on the internet currently. There's a visualization here, and as you can see, we are quite well covered in our own service region. We have a route collector in South Africa, but we don't capture stuff, don't capture these routing messages in for the rest of Africa. So we only see that indirectly. And so if you want to measure resilience, it's probably best that you measure the closest as possible to the thing that you want to measure. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give a couple of examples of what you can actually measure in terms of internet resilience with both of these measurement infrastructures. So for RIPE Atlas, very simple thing is outages. What you see on the left is somewhere, I think this was 2012, there was a large outage in the vicinity of Amsterdam, which is where I'm physically based. And because we have a lot of RIPE Atlas probes deployed there, we could actually see a lot of these probes going down at the same time. There was a research we did into sort of like these types of signals, and we can pretty reliably say something about outages if we have enough of these devices in an area. And to the right, and my apologies for this slide being really Amsterdam focused, but to the right is actually an outage of a very large internet exchange point in Amsterdam, one of the largest in the world. And what the question we asked us there was, there's this thing about the internet that it routes around damage. Is that actually true? Because if if a major interconnect point goes down, what actually happens to the traffic? And this was it was not a fun day for the network operators, but it was really insightful to actually see that the internet mostly routed around the damage. And as you can see in this picture, the green signifies the time when traffic was just going over the internet exchange point. And on the x-axis, you see time. And what you see in blue in this graph is the part of the traffic that got redirected to a path that did not go to the internet exchange. So, and there's a little bit of orange and red, which are actually failure modes. But for the most part, this actually showed that even for large outages in the specific topology around Amsterdam, the internet routes around damage, and you can actually measure that if you have enough measurement points nearby. So next slide has another use case of RIPE Atlas. Of course, COVID-19 is a thing. So we asked ourselves the question, what can you actually see in RIPE Atlas with regards to the lockdowns and other things related to this global pandemic? There's 2 links in there, and I think that the slides are going to be shared afterwards. So if you want to read more, the upper one is a RIPE Labs article that we did, and we have been working together with a researcher at IIJ, Roman Fontouge, who's actually was able to get signals out of RIPE Atlas with regards to average latency for the large internet providers for particular countries. And you can actually see an example here on this slide for Telecom Italia, that before the Italian lockdown, signals were pretty much steady. And then the week of the lockdown and weeks after the lockdown, there was significantly more congestion going on there. This is just an example of where we actually saw delays, but this was not the typical case that we saw. The typical case for the places where we looked was that the internet was keeping up by and large. So that's actually a good thing, but also good to actually see where things didn't go as expected. And my next slide is going to have another example of where you can see internet resilience. And this is looking into the tromboning that Amreesh talked about. There is a project, this is my pet project, it's called the IXP Country Jedi, and there's a URL here, where we take RIPE Atlas vantage points in particular countries. And the only thing is we have to have enough of these vantage points in a country to actually be able to measure that country for a little bit. And what we then do is between these measurement points, we do trace routes. So we look at the path between 2 points within a country, and we see, does it go through an IXP? So that's a sign of resilience. And also, does it go out of country? And I have an example of a map here for France. And while I don't believe all of these paths that are in there, it's pretty believable that for some points in France, traffic actually goes, or the path actually goes to the US East Coast and back. This is a phenomenon. It's both, I would say it's a good and a bad thing that just happens. It's bad because it's high latency, but it's also good to show that these types of paths actually also exist on the internet. In the top or in the bottom right, there's actually a trace route from Kenya to Kenya that goes through Amsterdam. And in the top right, there's a visualization of the internet in South Africa. And here we focus specifically on the interconnectivity between end users in a specific country. So if you have a RIPE Atlas probe in an end user network, you can say that is representative of an amount of end users. And we get this data about which ISPs have the most end users. And we just do this mesh trace route between them. And in South Africa here, you can see for the networks, for instance, Telecom Internet, who's at the top right, has I would say 15% market share, as you can see. And a lot of the path to the other ISPs that have a good market share go through internet exchange points, who are colored orange in here. So we have a lot of these types of visualizations, and I have a couple of extra slides if you want to know more about that. If we have enough probes in a country, we do this for any country every month. And if we don't have enough, then I would like to call people to actually help us get probes into these countries where we don't have them, because that makes things insightful and transparent. And then we can sort of look at, is this eyeball-to-eyeball connectivity resilient or not? So I now have a couple of examples for the RIS infrastructure. So that's, and Amreesh talked about bottlenecks, and this is an example of a little bit of research together with Citizens Lab and IIJ that we did on identifying bottlenecks. So RIS is the control plane of, measures the control plane. So we actually see which ISPs are connected to each other. And we do that, the challenge of this research was to do that for not only for countries, but also for regions that are not, like in this specific case, it's the Crimea, which is contested between Ukraine and Russia. And we were actually looking at neutral internet measurements, because there's two sides to this, to what's going on in Crimea. And we wanted to have like neutral data on what's actually going on. And what you can actually see here is that halfway through 2014, there were two ISPs that really were central to routing Crimean internet traffic towards the rest of the internet, so that they can be considered bottlenecks, and that of course can get you into questions of internet resilience. A next example is on the next slide. I don't have pretty pictures here, unfortunately, but if you think about resilience, then you also think about how well is an infrastructure like the internet dealing with security issues like hijacks and route leaks. One thing we do here is that our RIS infrastructure actually provides near real-time data, which is called RIS Live. This can be used to detect security events. So if you want to measure internet resilience, this basically is a live stream of data where you can actually build software on top of that helps you sort of mitigate attacks potentially. And there's two pieces of software, BGP Alerter and Artemis, that I know of that are actually doing this. So you could also think using this to actually measure reactivity to events. And then my final example is on the next slide. Again, COVID-19, but now from the BGP perspective. So the COVID pandemic was in itself also a test of internet resilience. Is the internet still able to function? And a question we asked of the data was, do we actually see patterns in networks changing their configuration? And is it different before, during, and after, or if there's an after for COVID, I should say. So what we did here was look at, out of the, it's 80,000 off the top of my head, networks in the global routing table, how many of them actually did announce a new IP prefix, removed one, changed origin. And we see about 400 to 800 out of them do this on a regular basis. And what you also see in this signal is the gray lines is when there's weekends. So you actually see there's less maintenance, less reconfiguration going on in the weekends. But I was a little bit surprised to actually see that there was not a significant change due to COVID, which you could interpret as people were still able, even remotely, to reconfigure their networks. So it's not more or less than before the COVID pandemic. So that's also a sign of resilience. And this is a global thing. You could probably get a signal out for Africa specifically, see if that's different. So next slide, please. Yeah, of course, measurement challenges. Maybe these are too obvious, but I want to put them into focus a little bit. Like, what you want for good high fidelity measurements is that you are close to the object you want to measure. So if you want to measure Africa, it's probably not a good idea if all your vantage points to do that are in Europe, because that adds latency. It just adds other networks in between that just dilute your signal. So having local measurement points is important. The other one is be comprehensive. Like, try to have all of the pieces of the internet you want to measure actually covered, and be representative. If you want to measure population, what a population towards something or towards another population, be sure that the things that you measure are actually representative of what you want to measure. Next slide, please. So for the infrastructure, for both infrastructures, it's challenging to keep vantage points up and running. And what really helps is have incentives for vantage point hosts. For RIPE Atlas hosts, they get credits for running, and it's also being part of something where others are able to measure, to make your internet better without you actually having to do an effort for that. Another challenge is getting vantage points in relevant places, and Africa is a good example. We would like to get more vantage points in relevant places, but it's proven difficult to keep vantage points up and running. And how do you actually get vantage points in these places? And we also are facing practical challenges. We had hardware failures. We had an issue with USB disks. So creating your own measurement infrastructure is quite a challenge. Let's look at it like that. Another thing is like local infrastructure. You saw the power outage in Amsterdam, but power outages are basically everywhere. And also, I guess for the African context, having mobile measurement, Atlas is not particularly tailored to that. So maybe taking the lessons from the wired and then moving into mobile, that's a viable path forward. Next slide, please.
Emil, can you wrap up, please? Because we have two more presenters.
Yes. Okay. So quickly, the things that I think, so I wanted to finish on a positive note. The things that we think are working is having engaged local community and ambassadors. If you have local people that see the value of this and can create community around this, that typically tends to get things deployed and get things measured reliably and successfully. Do the measurements that are relevant to a local community. So network operator groups, I've heard that over the last couple of years, specifically in Africa, there have been a lot of these popping up and being energized. So that's a good place for measurement. Virtualization, for RIPE Atlas, we've started doing software probes. And the other thing is having open data, an open methodology that builds trust, and others can actually reuse data and methodology. So I think that wraps it up from me. I have 2 extra slides with references, and with that, thanks for inviting me, and thank you.
Thank you, Emil. We will share your presentation so they can read the extra slides.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your interesting perspective, as well as the introduction of the RIPE Atlas. I am, in fact, a big fan of RIPE Atlas for many reasons, including very personal ones. I have an Atlas probe at home and office, and I use it for 2 purposes. First, I use it to check if there is internet in my office before going there. And second, I use it to know the uptime. And I was surprised, for example, that the uptime is sometimes as low as 50% per month. And I tried to communicate to the telecom company, even though nothing is happening for now. Why? Because they are a monopoly. And I think, as you said, we need to have more and more probes around Africa. And if you are willing to host a probe in your organization, it can be at home as well. It doesn't consume that much bandwidth. I have it at home and I don't really notice it. Please contact us. You can contact, I guess, Emil at Tribe or other people at Tribe, any of us in Africa at ISOC, as well as AFRINIC. We need more of them for Africa. Now I would like to invite Lai Orslen. I'm sorry again for not pronouncing the name correctly. So she will be talking about MLab's experience in internet measurement. Lai is project director, Measurement Lab. Lai had a very interesting bio. She's a tech worker and an artist. Before joining MLab, she worked to defend and promote human rights online with equality as technical programs manager. Lai is also a 2019 movement research artist in residence. Lai, you have 15 minutes for your presentation.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Can everyone hear me all right? I'm going to start my timer because I will talk forever if I'm not careful. So today I'm just hoping to describe what MLab is and how it can be thought of as a resource to the research community as well as regulators and policymakers. Measurement Lab's mission is to measure the internet, save the data, and make it universally accessible and useful. Although next slide, one thing to note is that there are many ways to measure the internet, as Emil's already talked about some. And by no means does Measurement Lab claim to do all of the ways you can measure the internet, but we do focus on openness and transparency as a way to do so. We'll talk towards the importance of open data, and our project is really trying to provide a way to measure the internet in the open so that everyone can see the numbers and then how we got the numbers as well. So I'll talk to that a bit more, but to say that all of the ways that we measure the internet are focused on having an open public repository of internet measurements. So go to the next slide, please. So I think when talking about Measurement Lab, it's actually useful to start at our sort of origin story and thinking about the problem that it identified and was trying to solve. So in 2008, or 12 years ago, a group of internet researchers started having the conversation about what was missing in internet measurement and what made it difficult to study something as vast and dynamic as the internet. And what was widely reported was that it was there was a lack of infrastructure of servers to be able to host the kinds of experiments that internet researchers wanted to be able to host, that had enough connectivity when we're also widely distributed enough to measure, again, something as dynamic and large as the internet. So this is the problem that the project identified. There was also one other widely shared challenge, which is the ability to share large data sets. So even if you had these measurements, how would you share it between researchers was a challenge at the time. And so these are the two problem sets that Measurement Lab is trying to solve with our work. So you can go to the next slide. So if you fast forward then 12 years, Measurement Lab today is still trying to answer these questions, and we do so through hosting our platform, our pipeline, our data, and we also do work by providing tools to make our data accessible. And so if you go to the next slide. Team is based at a nonprofit called Code for Science and Society. And the next slide. We also have had a number of contributors over the year, and currently as a core contributor, Google is donating the time of a small team of software engineers. So our team is made up of both organizations at the moment. You can go to the next slide. So getting into how we measure the internet, and I alluded to the problems we're trying to solve. The way we chose to solve the first one was to put servers in an all off-net platform, and I'll talk more a bit about that. I apologize, it's not the best screenshot because it's not including Africa. We have about, I think it's 5 or 6 pods in Africa. In about 60 plus metro areas worldwide. And this is something that we definitely like to increase our infrastructure on the continent, so we can talk about that a little bit further on. But first, to describe what this platform is. If you go to the next slide, so all of our servers are hosted in off-net data centers. And Emil talked a little bit about measurements being representative. This is our way of trying to measure the full path from user to content. So by off-net, I mean data centers that are outside of a user's access network. So focusing on ISPs that are primarily hosting content. So when a user runs a test, and we'll talk about how they do that, but when they do, they're not testing within their network that they get their internet service through. They're actually going through it and going into the ISP where that ISP peers with others. And so this is our, again, method to provide a representative representation of the full path from user to content. And the way that we like to say is that this is measuring the inter part of the internet. So all of our measurement services that we host, if you want to go to the next slide, all of our measurement services that we host are hosted on these off-net servers in these data centers. And they're, the measurement services themselves are primarily proposed by researchers and community members, and they're approved by our review committee. If you go to the next slide. And so on those servers, like I said, we run the measurement services on the server side, but the test clients are developed community or in the community. And this is what kind of completes our platform. So users are able to, communities develop clients, and the users then are able to use them to test against those servers. So some examples, Google Search has integrated our NDT test, which is our speed test, into the search integration. So if you Google how fast is my internet, that is an NDT test. It then tests against one of our servers in our off-net data center, and then the user is shown data, and that data is also publicly archived and then parsed into BigQuery. And we'll talk more about that, but just to fill the frame of how we get data is through hosting these measurement services in off-net data centers, and then relying on community-based clients to to allow users to run tests against those servers. Another example is the UMI integration of NDT and Dash, which is another test that we host. We go to the next slide. So MLab data is, we have 3 measurement services currently, but a big bulk of it is NDT data, which stands for Network Diagnostic Tool. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that since it is the majority of our data set. I'm going to go to the next slide. So the definition of NDT is, it measures the single stream performance of bulk transport capacity. That may or may not mean something to you already, but I'll break that down. Bulk transport capacity is referring to the rate that a link can deliver data with TCP. TCP is is in charge of the reliability of getting packets across the link. And so really it's a measurement of TCP, and in that way, it's a measure of the reliability of that link. Bulk transport capacity is not the same as link capacity. Link capacity is looking at the maximum bit rate of that link. And what's confusing is that both of these terms can mean speed. So we refer to it as a speed test, but there's also other definitions of speed. And I just point that out because it can be confusing to know, what is your internet speed when there are kind of different results that you can get. But ours specifically is measuring bulk transport capacity, which is again the reliability of the link. And then if you go to the next slide, it's also measuring the single stream performance. So this is a way to get an effective baseline of what that connection is able to do. So a TCP or a browser might open multiple TCP streams, and we're just measuring the one. So again, this is just getting an effective baseline on a single stream of TCP performance and how reliably it's able to get packets across the link. So if you go to the next slide, I just bring this up because a question that we often get is, why is my MLab test result different than others? And it's, we think of our test and other tests as useful complements of one another when measuring speed. Other speed test providers often have different infrastructure than us. So of course, our test is going to be a representative of, again, that full path from user to content. And then also NDT is a measurement of TCP specifically and the ability to get packets across reliably. And so those definitions altogether are what produce the results that you're getting. And if you go to the next slide, I'm going to go through these. Actually, these I'm erring on the side of using my slides as resources that people can go back to. These are talking through other measurement services that we host as well on the platform currently. I'm hoping you can go back and look at those, and also our website. And the next one, next slide. Oh, thank you. One thing I'll mention though is that for every NDT test that's run, a traceroute test is also run. So this is incredibly, there's so much data in there. So for every single test that's run, not even just NDT, I should say, but for all Wiki and Dash as well, the past two, those all run traceroute tests from the server back to the client. And so there's a lot of routing data and there's a lot of useful information in there, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But just to mention that that's also what happens when you run a test. In the next slide. Also some low-level TCP metrics that I won't get into right now, but are there. Go to the next slide. So this is what I wanted to get to, branching off of talking about the nuances of the NDT data. What makes the data valuable, though, is actually the data in aggregate. So a given NDT test or a given any test is only going to be so useful because it's just one test of what's happening at that moment in time on something that's changing all the time, which is the internet. So all of our tests, and I think all data sets are useful in aggregate because you can start to see the patterns and trends on a large scale. So if one person is testing a certain way, that's information, but it really becomes meaningful when you put it in contrast or in comparison with the tests of other users in that region and in that network. So I'm going to go to the next slide. This is really the benefit and I think the pride point of the MLab project is that we have a lot of data. We get something like 3 million new NDT measurements per day. And as of 2020, we're close to 2 billion rows in that table alone. Again, I'll point out too that also for every single one of those tests, there's a traceroute data or a traceroute test as well. So there's just massive amounts of data that can be used to look again at those patterns and trends. And I think this is getting at the also the benefit of, I think, going to the next slide. Having all of this data out in the open allows for regulators, researchers, advocates to all have a conversation based on the same numbers and being able to see all of that happen from start to finish. So, all of the measurement services that I mentioned are open source, using open source code. So if there's any question as to how calculations are being made, it's in the open. All of the reference clients are also open source. And by reference clients, I mean the clients that we provide to help developers make their own clients. And then from start to finish, again, when we run a test, that gets publicly archived and then parsed into BigQuery, which is free to access. So just to paint the picture of an entirely open pipeline that we find that we really advocate for being the way in which decisions are made about the internet and making decisions based on user contributed tests as well. And if we go to the next slide, so user contributed, meaning that there's just a really low barrier of entry to being able to take a test and also for that data to be shared and accessed. If we go to the next slide. We also are concerned about privacy, as we understand that users are as well, are primarily concerned about that. So we collect the IP address level data, no further. And also if you're interested in our privacy policy, just by nature of being a public project, that is a concern of ours. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about how to handle user privacy by collecting the IP, but also allowing users to remove it. And you can look for more information there. I'm going to talk now about accessing the data, although I will go a bit more quickly through this, as this is something that I think is, we have good documentation on. So if you go to the next slide. As I've been mentioning, all of our data is parsed into BigQuery, which was getting at that second challenge that I spoke to earlier about if we did have this infrastructure to host these experiments on, then how would we share the data with one another? And hosting it in BigQuery has been our answer to that. So it's we're able to provide that for free. You just sign up for a mailing list essentially, and you are able to use SQL or Python to access the data from BigQuery. You're also able to access it through the raw public archives, but very few people want to do that. So BigQuery makes it a bit more consumable. And we also have our visualization site that's linked there. Currently, what's there actually, though, it's being upgraded. But if you go to the next slide, sorry.
Like, can you wrap up, because we really need a few minutes for.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so yeah, I'll end here actually then. So this is our way to access the data most accessibly. If you go to that site right now, let's see if you go to the next one. There are dashboards here. This is showing the US one, but there's a global dashboard as well that can speak to the ability to go through, see the data through time and be able to compare it through specifically COVID. These were developed support from Internet Society to look at the changes through the pandemic. And so it's makes it really easy to be able to export data. So you can go look for a specific region and then download the CSV. If you go through the next ones, there's a bunch of other information here. I'll actually maybe just end it and say that a big part of what we're also trying to do is to provide easy ways for communities to collect data. We have data in Africa, but we could certainly have much, much more. And so if you're interested, if you're a regulator or an advocate looking to get more data in a specific region, please reach out. That's something that we're thinking about a lot. Tools like Piecewise and Murakami that we went through, and we'd be happy to talk through what makes sense for your community and how we can help. But I suppose my takeaways are that we have a lot of NDT data, and it's there, it's free, it's open, and we're hoping that people use it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lai, for this excellent presentation. I hope that everybody will have listened your suggestions to use the ample data that exists at MLab and use it. I've seen in the polls that the majority of the participants are internet researchers, so I think they have really a good place to search for data. The next presenter is my colleague Kevin Chege. He will talk about the project Measuring Internet Resilience in Africa that ISOC and AFRINIC will be launching shortly. Kevin joined the Internet Society in 2012, where he currently works as Internet Development Director. He has more than 17 years experience in the tech space, starting at KENET, the Kenya Education Network Trust, where he served as network manager, responsible for IP network design, training, network operations, and network services, including managing DNS, etc. Kevin holds a bachelor's degree in information systems from USIU Africa in Kenya, and a master's degree in information security from Luleå University of Technology, Sweden. Thank you, Kevin. You have 12 minutes.
Thanks, David.
Or less, if you can. Before we go, Kevin, can I ask the other presenters to answer to the questions in the Q&A, because I see that there are many questions that have been asked, and I'm afraid that you might not have a lot of time. So if you can answer to those questions online, that would be excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, David, and good afternoon or good morning, everyone. So I'll make a presentation on a project that we are about to start with AFRINIC. So for many of us who are in Africa, we experience a lot of internet outages or service degradations. And although there's a lot of internet measurement data out there, it's distributed. So it's challenging to know, how, what the state of the internet in different African countries is. Next slide, please. So with AFRINIC, we've been discussing, and we think that one solution that would help at least determine the state of the internet is to do sustained internet measurements and identify what are the key infrastructures, what are the policies that help in getting countries to have good internet connectivity. And what we are calling this project is measuring internet resilience in Africa. And I'm going to use this terminology a lot, internet resilience, and simply explained, it's the ability of a network to maintain an acceptable level of service of connectivity at all times. Next slide, please. So the goals of the measurement are mainly two: to determine the internet resilience in select countries, at least to start with. We want to start with a few. Then once we are comfortable with the metrics and come up with a scalable way to measure these, the state of the internet countries, maybe add more countries. Then we also want to present the data in a manner that is easy for anyone to understand, whether you're a policymaker or an engineer or just a normal internet user who wants to find out more about a country or the country you live in, the internet state in that country. Next slide, please. So the objectives are, want to develop an internet resilience measurement framework. So want to come up with a definition of internet resilience, and then identify the metrics or types of data that we can use to determine internet resilience. As you've seen from the past presentations, there are a lot of metrics you can measure, but which are the key ones, or which are the most important ones, or what are the priority metrics that we can use to determine internet resilience? Once we do that, we want to deploy some measurement infrastructure. And then, as I mentioned, we want to present this in a very easy to use manner for any type of internet user. We are hoping to start with at least 10 countries this year. And then as we're doing this work, the measurement dashboard is being developed separately, and then we're going to integrate all that as we move along. Next slide, please. So who are these measurements for, who can make use of the data that we're hoping to obtain? So if you're an end user or a policymaker, or maybe someone in the technical field, or you're a researcher, or doing some sort of work on internet measurements, we're hoping this type of information may be useful to you. Next slide, please. So why do we want to carry out internet measurements? So, Africa is a big place, but, it's difficult to tell what are the different experiences in different countries. We know there are a lot of numbers out there in terms of quantitative measurements, but how does that stack up against the qualitative measurements out there? So we want to determine, yes, the numbers say this, but what is the feedback on the ground on what the real state of the internet is? What is the speeds like in countries which have multiple ISPs, but versus countries that don't have multiple ISPs? What is the impact of fiber cuts or throttling or unstable power? What policies are beneficial for stable interconnectivity? These are some of the data we'd like to obtain, and what we hope to get out from the research. Next slide, please. We've identified a couple of data sources, RIPE, MLab, BGP Mon, among others. We're also going to combine these, we intend to combine these stats you can get from measurement tools like these with qualitative data which you measure through feedback and surveys. And then, as I mentioned, we'll start with a small set of metrics and also a few countries, and then see how we can scale that up to more countries and more data sources. Next. So a few benefits which we've identified. We are hoping to, by carrying out sustained measurements, we can show historical growth in different countries. We want to provide an easy platform for internet users to determine their internet reliability, and you can use that to, make a case for better infrastructure, better connectivity for your ISP. Provide up-to-date information on the quality of internet connectivity in different countries, and then, of course, provide insights for policymakers on what policies are favorable for good internet connectivity. Next slide, please. So these are the timelines so far. We have started a bit of the work in terms of defining the document. We're hoping to finish that by next month. And before the end of the year, at least have some sort of data to share. It might necessarily not be with the measurement dashboard, whether it's ready or not. If it's ready, we'll use that. If not, we'll find a way to present that as the measurement dashboard gets completed. Next slide. So some metrics very briefly. So obviously ISP stats are very important, uptime, throughput, and how they're doing their routing. Physical infrastructure of a country, what type of infrastructure do they have in terms of submarine cables, power, if it's landlocked, how are they getting their connectivity through the terrestrial cables. Critical infrastructures, IXP, CCTLDs. So basically, if you're going to look at a country and you just want to see what type of infrastructure they have, from the dashboard that we're hoping to develop, you can get all that in sort of one easy to go through dashboard, one easy to view set of data. And we're hoping to complete that by at least have some data before the end of the year. So I've been very quick. I didn't have any pretty graphs to share because we've not done the measurement yet, but you can go to that first URL there, which we're hoping to provide more information. That is a mailing list that is hosted by AFRINIC. And then the second URL down there, which we also share in the chat, we always like to get a feel of the audience from the webinar. So there's a survey there that you can fill, with a bit of metrics that we've summarized and which we'd like to get the audience feel on what we think are the most important ones. So I think I'll stop here and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, and back to you, David.
Thank you, Kevin. As Kevin said, this is a new project that we are going to work on, and we need many of you in many countries. So if you are interested to participate in some way or another, please let us know. Now we are going to the questions and answers. Please continue to ask your questions in the Q&A. My colleague Verenga has selected a few questions that I'm going to write in the chat room and call upon the presenters to answer. I'm not sure to whom they are directed, so everybody can jump in. So the first question is from Steve Song. You can read the whole question, but the main part is the end where it says, are there any efforts to develop a freely available open source, open data mobile tool for measuring internet? Would like to answer to this question.
I can try to answer that. Yes. No, unfortunately, we haven't seen in the recent years any specific effort to try to measure the African internet in the sense that having a specific platform, for example, to capture mobile broadband. Of course, there are tools that can be used, and there are actually even private companies that have tools that you can actually use to measure 2G, 3G, or 4G. But if I'm not mistaken, most of them now are commercial platforms, and you have to pay to get the data. So to my knowledge, there is no open platform for measuring mobile broadband, for example, in Africa. And that would be, in my opinion, something we should be thinking about in the long run.
Thank you, Amreesh. I will go to the next question since we only have 10 minutes. So this question was in French. It has been translated. Geoffrey Bonu, should there be a regulatory framework to promote the implementation of RIPE Atlas at the national level? This is for Emil, I suggest. I guess.
Should there be a regulatory? That depends. I think every local situation is unique. So it really depends on local situation what a local internet would need. Also, I'm not a policy person, so I stay on the technical side. So from the technical side, I would love it to see all kinds of to figure out what instruments work and what not. What the sense I get, at least from my European perspective, is that people tend to not like being forced by regulations to do measurements. So that would be a disincentive in that case.
Indeed. If I may, Emil, I think, similar as some regulatory practices, for example, to request ISPs to peer, we have seen that in the past, it doesn't really work. I think it would be the same here. What I think would be useful, for example, like in a country, to have a group that is representative maybe of the whole country, and then having those interested people participate in the measurement efforts. I think that would be more beneficial than actually imposing a certain measurement platform. And then there is also the question: what measurement platform do you want to impose on the operators?
So maybe having a regulator helping these people that are interested in actually doing this to resolve roadblocks instead of forcing measurement upon networks. I think that might be a more viable approach to go.
Thank you, Emil. Thank you, Amreesh. Our next question is from Meoli. I guess it is Professor Kashorda. There is currently no open measurement infrastructure from measuring mobile broadband. The point is there is an opportunity to build a measurement platform that answers to Africa's specific context. Do you agree with this? Anyone who would like to comment on this?
Maybe one thing for a mobile measurement is that what I've seen a couple of projects and not getting traction. I think on a technical level it might be possible, but having the incentives right for people to actually put some piece of software onto their devices. And typically mobile is metered services, so that would be a direct disincentive because it will directly cost you money. Sort of thinking about the incentives before actually going into the technical details on how to do that would be a good path forward. Finding what would actually work in this particular environment.
Thank
You're
you.
right. I agree. I would say that the paradigm is a bit different. So, for example, RIPE Atlas are mostly connected in, I would say, core networks in Africa. So, all the aspect of rural connectivity is not measured almost not at all. So through mobile measurement, that would be possible. But then we will need to answer the challenge of how to make it sustainable, because as Emil said, it would cost the end users data. So maybe this is where the regulators can come into the picture, like helping anyone running measurements, for example, perhaps to get free data bundles, and then place it in strategically located areas so that we have a good picture of the country, for example.
Thank you. There is a comment from Rosemary from Zimbabwe Consumer Council. I'm not going to read it since it's long, but I'm copying it again in the chat room so that everybody can read it. The next question is from Michael Nelson, and I write it in the chat room as well. Are AFRINIC and RIPE partnering with CDNs to get more vantage points? Which ones and how?
I did provide a little bit of an answer there already. So for the RIPE Atlas, we have RIPE Atlas anchors. And so these are a bit beefier devices installed in various CDNs. And for the BGP view, it would be really interesting because to have this conversation with particular CDNs to actually get more of their feeds, because they're typically islands of BGP that have a really nice local view of what a local internet looks like. So getting these feeds and getting that out in the open would be really interesting.
Thank you. Amreesh, would you like to add something, or should we move?
I think Emil answered it correctly.
Thank you. The next question to Kevin. Which are the countries identified at the first round of the Africa Internet Resilience Platform? How will all the metrics data collected? How will all the metrics data be collected? I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks, David. Thanks for the question. So as I mentioned, we want to start with 10 countries initially and then ramp that up as we move along. We have a selection criteria that we are going to use. The selection criteria will take in a number of factors like presence of measurement infrastructure, diversity in the region in terms of, we want to cover up all parts of Africa, so to give a bit of variety to the data. And also connectivity information, like submarine, countries that are not landlocked versus countries that are landlocked. So we have the criteria. We've not finalized the whole list of 10 countries. We probably know about 5 of them, but we are going to share more information on the mailing list as we, conclude on that.
Thanks, Kevin. The next one is from Desalegn from Ethiopia. How do you select vantage points to capture measurement dumps? Any of you would like to comment, to answer?
I can, a short one would be, you would like to have diversity in that, so capture the most important networks. And I guess in Ethiopia, you have a single network that covers the whole country. So that would be in that network. And you also want geographical diversity. So not just from your capital, have sort of what does the internet look like in various parts of your country. So that's sort of how you ideally would want to sort of diversify your measurement points. I hope that answers it.
I believe so. Thank you. So I think this will be the last question, and then we'll close. ISOC Benin is building a platform called internet.bj, which is currently under development. How, if possible, can the chapter collaborate in the Internet Resilience Measurement in Africa project? I think this is a question to Kevin.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm not familiar with internet.bg. I'm not sure what exactly it's measuring. What I would say is maybe we can talk about that off list and then see what's possible.
yeah, we will definitely contact you. So thank you for letting us know. Okay, I think it was a very interesting webinar. I personally have learned a lot. Thank you all the presenters for your interesting presentations, perspectives, etc. And thank you also for the 115 or so participants. I was not expecting that many, considering the low number of registrations, but thank you all for coming and staying for most of you for the 90 minutes and answering to the questions, etc., and asking the questions as well. I will now, I think we don't have time for the closing remarks. I wished we had time, so we have given everybody an opportunity to answer to questions, so we will go directly to the closing. This is, as I said, the fourth webinar. This is was focused on measurement. The next one will be on July 30 at about the same time. It will be focusing on complementary access solutions for underserved communities. And we will be, of course, very happy to see you all. Also, if when you get the announcement, please don't hesitate to share it with other people. For now, I will just say thank you, have a good day, and see you all soon. Bye-bye.